On August 3, 1966, the Marines got the word to prepare for a new operation against an old foe. Operation Prairie would involve 11 battalions, nearly 11,000 men. As in Hastings, their mission would be to prevent the NVA's 324B Division from gaining a foothold below the DMZ. Spearheading the operation was the 1st Force Recon Company. Danny Pyler's first introduction to the men of Marine Force Recon was on the decks of the USS Guam.
And every morning I go up to smoke a cigarette up on the flight deck when they give us permission. And I see these 7 guys running around on the flight deck. I mean, they were sharp son of a guns, all of them muscle-bound guys. And they wore their green chucks with black trim on them. And their covers were starched real perfect. And they wore the green T-shirts and green shorts. And all day long we see them down there in the 2nd level where they store the helicopters, doing pull-ups and sit-ups and having classes, map reading classes. And they'd sit there and I asked them guys, is that Force Recon? And they said, yeah.
Force reconnaissance companies are the Marines' Special Operations Force that provided eyes-on intelligence for ground operations. They are capable of performing unconventional special operations similar to those of the SEALs, Rangers, and Special Forces.
Our job wasn't to fight. Our job was to snoop and poop and reconnoiter an area and then sneak out. But if we ever did have to fight, we carried enough ammunition we could hold our own until we got some help there to get us out.
Once the NVA was located, the 5-man recon teams would call for artillery, helicopter gunships, or close air support to wipe them out.
We'd be up on the highest ridges we could be watching rivers. And we'd see them coming over with elephants and water buffalo, just loaded with artillery. And we just call in airstrikes and naval gunfire and our whatever batteries were close, 105s and 155s, and we blew the poop out of them guys.
If the artillery and air support didn't rout out the enemy, then Marine rifle companies would be called in to fix and annihilate the enemy force.
We were the best of the best in the Marines, and we knew we were. And everywhere we went, those grunts would hate it when we landed in their regiment or battalion-sized CP command posts and centers. They'd think, oh no, another operation.
We had a lot of inserts of recon people. The recon people, some of them had dogs with them, and that got to be a little bit touchy because you go drop them in a landing zone and then everything breaks loose in the middle of the night and they've got to get out, and here you've got to worry about what they're going to do with that dog, and if the dog's master got killed or got wounded and couldn't operate, then somebody had to take over taking care of the dog.
The SOP was a recon team would have 2 Hueys because of our heavy packs. You couldn't get all 7 of us on one Huey. And it didn't take long when the NVA heard those noises that they turn out black. It's all blacked out. But they would hear those Hueys land in that valley. Well, they would surround that valley, and so many recon teams would get annihilated. So they changed the procedure that if one recon team went out, two Hueys, they'd send out 20 Hueys. And they land in valleys all around that area. Just go down and touch down and take back off. So it confused the NVA that, you know, they'd head for nothing.
On this mission, the enemy had a surprise for the Marines of Force Recon. Three days after being inserted into their area of patrol, one of the recon teams pinpointed a large NVA force just north of the area called the Rock Pile. After artillery fire smothered the area, the observing recon team began receiving enemy fire. They hastily called for a rifle company for support.
Every time there was one recon team out, you had to have a company of grunts laying on the flight deck, 6 on one side of the chopper, 6 on the other side of the chopper, and 2 pilots asleep in their seats. in case one of us, our team called in, get us out of here, we're under help, or we need some help or something. They on them choppers and they're in there to get us out.
Company E from the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, arrived, but they were too late. The enemy force had vanished. For the next 48 hours, Company E and the Recon team hunted for NVA. They found nothing. It was as if they had never been there. The search was called off, and the combined force moved to an LZ for extraction. As a Marine helicopter lowered toward the LZ, they began to receive ground fire from NVA riflemen hidden on a nearby ridge. The Marines were now trapped and fighting for their lives. The NVA charged the open LZ from out of the surrounding jungle. With guns blazing, they swarmed around the 25 Marines remaining at the LZ. The lieutenant in command of Easy Company and his first sergeant were killed within moments of the NVA assault. Command of Company E immediately fell to the Recon team leader. He ordered the surviving Marines to set up a defense perimeter around their LZ. Airstrikes and artillery were called in on the company's position.
You could only see little glimpses of them on the ground through the clouds, and we're circling and trying to get a bead on where everybody was. And to make a long story short, we made, when there's hostile fire, you're supposed to make one run and get out of there so as not to risk the airplane. But we made 4 or 5 runs because we didn't want to drop all our ordnance in one run and have it not be in the right spot.
Marine firepower sent the NVA force back into the cover of the jungle. Throughout their long history, the Marines had fought in some of the most God-forsaken battlefields on Earth. The rock pile was to be one of the worst.
Rock pile, I guess, that's kind of a misnomer. I guess that's what we called it, because it was just it was a built-up area right outside of Cam Low, but you could see the DMZ from it. It's like a fire support base, you know, where they had artillery and stuff like that.
And the rock pile was right next to what we called Rocket Valley. And the rock pile, every night, you've heard of Tokyo, you know, Tokyo Rose. Well, we had Hanoi Hana. Well, every night, you know, we would have a group meeting. Like our sergeants would come back and say, okay, guys, we're getting ready to go out in the morning, you know, saddle up. We're going to be leaving out at 0400. Choppers are going to be here. We're going to walk. We're going to Cam Low. We're going to hit this. We're going to do that, yada, 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 get ready. Well, we'd turn Armed Forces Vietnam radio on, you know, with Crocodile, you know, when he yelled, "Good morning, Vietnam," we actually heard all that. But later on, we would have Hanoi Hana. And she would come on and she'd be talking and she goes, "Oh, you guys, you poor guys in 3-9, you're all going over to Cam Low in the morning and we're just going to have to tell your family. We killed every one of you." And we're going, our guys just got out of a meeting 2 or 3 hours ago and just told us about it, and here she's broadcasting it on the radio. Of course, it was spooky. It was really spooky.
By September of 1966, an entire Marine battalion was posted atop the rock pile. Their position was under constant attack by the NVA.
Now, at the rock pile, we got shelled pretty good at the rock pile one night, and that's up. You can actually, rock pile was kind of neat. I don't know what the actual name was. Right outside of Cam Low, but you could actually look out, and a mile out, you could see the DMZ. So it was out in Charlie's country, I guess you'd call it. But we got shelled real bad there one night, and in fact, I had to get another Jeep because it destroyed my Jeep. I wasn't in it at the time, but it destroyed my Jeep.
Just a few hundred feet below the rock pile, the NVA had created a fortified position to launch mortar attacks and use as a base to execute ambushes.
And we got to the point where I'd say maybe once a week our commander would have everything in the rock pile, fire on this thing, everything. You know, big guns, mortars, machine guns, handguns, everything. And I'll guarantee you, within 30 minutes after it was over with, we'd take sniper fire again.
On September 22nd, 1966, the 3rd of the 4th Marines were ordered to evict the bad neighbors. Their job was to take out the NVA on Hill 484 and push the Reds' supply lines back into Laos. Loaded with 70 pounds of gear, the Marines used machetes to clear enough jungle to walk. 4 days after landing at the LZ starting point, the Marines secured Hill 400 without a fight. The signs of the NVA were everywhere. They found enough huts in the ravines to harbor a regiment and piles of ammunition. The Marines settled in for the night. The next morning, Company K split off from the Marine Battalion and moved toward Hill 484. Suddenly, they were hit by NVA fire from all sides. It was a trap, and Company K was completely surrounded.
You've got battles that'll last maybe 2 hours all day or all night. But the initial engagement, when you have that first engagement, it's not going to last long. Normally, if you can last that first 5 or 6 minutes, you'll make it.
The rest of the battalion rushed to their aid and set up a defensive position. As the sun set, they hoped they would survive the night. For 2 days, they took everything the enemy threw at them. Finally, reinforcements arrived just in time to hurl the enemy back into the jungle before they could wipe out Company K. The surviving Marines fell back to Hill 400.
You know, 1 second that we're there, and the next second they weren't. And there's so much going on. There's so much screaming and yelling and heavy weapons going off, and the smell and the powder and just it's mass chaos for a little bit. I mean, you're yelling for medics, and guys are screaming, and it's just it's just something that I don't know. You got to the point where you were almost, you kind of block yourself. You try not to think, well, that's my good friend over there. We went through boot camp together. We went through all this training. Now he's dead, and you don't realize it. And I think, it's turning in 60 now. You think about my personal conviction is, everybody said, we went over to fight the Vietnamese. We went over there to stop the domino effect, and we're going to overcome communism, yada, yada, yada. And we're fighting for, mom and apple pie. It's bull***. You weren't fighting for that. There was a guy over there shooting at you. You were madder than hell, and you were shooting back at him, and, the best man won. And that's how a lot of us thought about that. I mean, yeah, we had patriotism. I mean, we were proud to be Americans and proud to be Marines. But, fighting for the flag and all that, no, you're scared to death.
As a result of taking that hill, contact with the NVA near the Quang Tri province sputtered out afterwards.
Most of us were, I was, like I said, going on 18, and the rest of them were 19. We were just young kids. And we did the best we could with what we had. We did the best we could in the worst situations that we had.
The Marines first came to Khe Sanh with a ground combat battalion, the 1st of the 3rd Marines, in September 1966. General Westmoreland ordered that a fortified base with its own airfield be built there.
One of the major bases that we supported was Khe Sanh, and you've probably heard of Khe Sanh. It was up in the mountains, and if I remember right, one of the key hills that overlooked Khe Sanh was 851, and I can recall going up to Khe Sanh. They had a runway there that you could land a C-130 on, and that's the way they resupplied the people in the Khe Sanh area, and also resupplied the Marines in the outlying mountains around Khe Sanh.
Westmoreland should have remembered what happened to the French over 10 years earlier. The NVA was determined to maintain their foothold in the northern provinces of South Vietnam. To protect the vital trails from the north, they decided to attack the exposed and lightly defended base at Khe Sanh. In mid-April of 1967, Recon patrols began to report a significant increase in the NVA presence in the area. U.S. Air Force Tiger Hound observation aircraft reported an alarming buildup of fortifications and NVA activity on the hills overlooking the base. The Marine base commander was unconvinced that these reports were true. He did, however, send 2 infantry platoons, the 1st and 3rd of Bravo Company, over to Hill 861 about a week later to clean up whatever enemy was there. They soon found the enemy.
The first day I got hit, we were up around, I think it was Mudder's Ridge or Dong Ha Mountain, and we had walked into what's called a horseshoe ambush. If you can just imagine, it's like you're holding a big U shape. Well, we had gone into it. The whole company had gone into it. So this was a huge, NVA had a huge one. And they were just wailing the shit out of us. And I can remember, we set our guns up, the 81's up, we set our guns up, and I was looking down line, and I can vividly remember my gunnery sergeant was a big man, and I thought he was ancient. He must have been 31 at the time, big guy. And he was pointing at us, screaming, and I saw it was like a black cloud. And all of a sudden, he was gone. That was it. He got hit directly on the head with a mortar round.
This cleanup operation would cost the Marines 14 killed in action, 18 wounded in action, and 2 missing. The Marines would claim an estimated 100 enemy killed.
Every once in a while, we'd come across an NVA platoon that were coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and a guy might be carrying a complete tire. Another guy would be carrying like a front seat. 4 of them would be carrying like a motor block. They'd break all this stuff down and use all this stuff. They were extremely ingenious type people.
On May 9, 1967, 6 men from the long-range reconnaissance team Breaker, Alpha Company, 3rd Marine Recon, plus a Navy corpsman were inserted by helicopter onto a hilltop covered in elephant grass.
Most of the patrols went out with corporals or sergeants in charge, sometimes lance corporals if they were experienced enough. You had 2 radios, you had a 79, you had tail end, you had a point, and maybe somebody else if you had enough.
The recon team's mission was to locate, identify, and report on enemy activity along a suspected infiltration route used by the NVA. After the helicopters departed, the team set out security. Hank Strong knew the drill well.
What you would do is you'd set up a hasty defensive perimeter. 3 or 4 guys would get out, set that up. The rest of the team would come out, and then you'd move out. The squad would move out. And when I say the squad, you might have 8 men on the mission, you might have 13, you might have 15. Normally, though, it was around a dozen people. And you would go through the bush as quickly and as quietly as you could, because you wanted to get to what we called the Alpha Bravo ambush point as quickly as possible, get set up as quietly as possible to conduct the raid or the ambush.
As they moved into position, the Marines uncovered a well-constructed complex that was surrounded by 4 empty bunkers and assorted communist gear. Unaware that the Americans had been inserted into the center of their stronghold, the NVA returned to their fortified position on top of the hill just after midnight. The members of RT Breaker waited until the enemy troops were nearly upon them before opening fire. Their first rounds killed several of the closest NVA soldiers. The rest of the communist force pulled back to the bunker complex and immediately began throwing grenades and satchel charges at the entrenched Marines. Within 2 hours, all but 3 of the Americans were dead, and one of those still alive was unconscious.
Combat is personal and private as well, and it is, because you may have 10,000 guys on your side, but what you're fighting for is that piece of land you happen to be standing on at that time, and the guys on either side of you. That's what you're fighting for. You're not fighting to get rid of all these guys out in front of you. They can bring them one at a time all day long. We don't care. But you're fighting for yourself and for your buddies, and it becomes personal and private and just as hard to ignore as an elephant in the room. It's just there. And no matter where you look, everyone else is involved in their own literal drama.
In order to keep the NVA from overrunning their position, 18-year-old Private First Class Stephen D. Lopez, the radio operator, kept calling in artillery fire support missions from the batteries located at Khe Sanh.
The radio operator would yell down, "Team 7's in trouble," and everybody would run to the tent and they would listen to him.
All night long, as the artillery came in, Lopez adjusted the fire around the hill to wherever he saw enemy movement. Between 0220 and 0630 hours, 3 attempts were made to rescue the embattled reconnaissance team. The first aircrew dropped flares all over the area to light up the hill.
Night mountain flying without much illumination, unless you know the area of operation real well, will get you killed because you're flying around mountains and stuff like that.
In the end, even with the artillery and Huey gunship firepower pouring into the enemy positions, the rescue attempt proved an impossible task because the ground fire was so heavy.
I can remember flying towards the area, and about treetop level, I was looking down. I could see, looked like there was columns of NVA moving in that area. I mean, we could see them moving in, and, you know, which is, there's some butt kickers. The NVA, now they're regular Army, they're good.
One Huey, call sign Scarface, swept in under heavy fire. Lopez got Scarface on the radio. He screamed into his radio, "Scarface, this is Breaker. We're burning. You gotta get us out. Scarface, you gotta get us out. We're burning up."
But I remember going in, and it was an area where it was a lot of trees, and we had to hover and drop straight down into the area. Well, as we dropped down in the area, we just started catching fire going in. Matter of fact, they shut all our radio equipment out. It was gone. So we had no communications with the CNC ship up above. So we were basically on our own.
Scarface set down in the zone. The crew chief jumped out with a crewmate to haul the survivors aboard. The Huey struggled to get airborne while taking fire. The Breaker patrol action proved to be the final contact of the Khe Sanh Hill battles.